with the Center for Learning and Teaching and an adjunct instructor in the Department of English at Old Dominion University. Crystal has crafted tech-forward activities in her composition courses for over 12 years. She blends her experience working with first-generation and non-traditional students, curriculum development, creating interactive and accessible online course content, and training and mentoring faculty, all in order to help them achieve positive student outcomes and success. Now, if you have any questions at all during the presentation today, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we'll be addressing those at the end of the talk. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Shriver. Wait just 1 second. So again, we are going to be covering delivery retention is your course content digestible today.
Our goals for today are to determine the best practices for chunking lecture material, distinguishing effective strategies for constructing engaging, accessible slide decks, and recognizing successful home recording strategies.
Chunking requires pre-planning and is a two-stage process. The first step is breaking down information into smaller bits of information that can be processed by your students' working memory. And the second step would be organizing these bits into a logical order for students to process the information from their working memory to encode it into their long-term memory. This will help drive your content creation or revision.
There are several things that must be considered when starting to chunk course materials. You want to consider the big picture, logical order, review your organization, revise or create new content, and conduct a quality review.
So when looking at the big picture, you need to determine what is most critical for course or lecture success and learning outcomes and remove any extraneous material. The removal process is probably more crucial for a lecture you're revisiting or revising versus creating a new lecture. When you're starting to chunk your material, it's important to keep in mind that the information must be broken down into smaller bits that can still be processed. You will ultimately want to aim for one main idea per video. While nice to know and interesting facts work for synchronous learning, they may overwhelm an asynchronous learner.
You want to consider the logical order of your information. Effectively, how will you scaffold your material for your students to digest in a logical order, such as simple to complex ideas, building on prior knowledge? You need to consider how your course is structured. Are you having students work through simple material and then moving on to more complex? Are the students using knowledge from prior subject area courses, or is it scaffolded? These pedagogical choices will determine how you're going to organize the lecture material. You must consider the ultimate goal for your lecture, content, and course.
Once you've created that logical order, you need to determine the best organization for the objectives and outcomes. Now that you've gathered your main ideas, you need to determine the best way to present them to your students. First, you'll make an outline of your major topics and subtopics. Because you want to aim for one main idea per video, you need to chunk the material into manageable pieces, aiming for videos that are approximately 6 minutes in length. Guo et al. In 2014 found that student attention quickly wanes after 6 minutes. If you have material that is substantially longer than 6 minutes, you need to consider how to further chunk the material. Once you've determined your mini lectures, you need to decide what organization will work best for the material. The order in which you cover topics in a synchronous course may not work for an asynchronous setting. And in the speaker notes, when you get the slide deck, there are additional research components for studio engagement provided.
When you're considering your material, you have to decide, do you want to revise it or do you need to create something? That design to revise or recreate comes with working memory in mind, as it's going to impact your decisions. At this stage, you need to determine if you'll include any interactive elements or not, as this is going to impact the length of your video. If you're presenting complex problems such as math, you'll find it will be helpful to record videos with one problem per video. If the problems are especially complex, you should record each part of the problem. The smaller mini lectures help your students find information easier. The mini lectures allow them to quickly navigate to review the content that they are struggling with. When creating your presentation, you want to avoid referring to book chapters, page numbers, or modules in a course, as this information may change in future iterations of the course. The goal is to create sustainable materials that don't require as much editing or recreation in the future. The use of mini lectures should make future course content edits more manageable, as you'll only need to redo the chunks rather than recreate or edit an entire lecture. If you're reworking material that you already have, it may be faster to rework or recreate than revise in some cases. While some things work exceptionally well in synchronous face-to-face courses, it may not be successful for an asynchronous course. In these cases, it's often more time efficient to create a new presentation than it is attempt to rework materials that you already have. This does not mean that you have to replace the information in your synchronous courses. It just means that it's delivered differently in synchronous and asynchronous formats. In fact, you could even supplement your synchronous courses with your asynchronous course material.
Once you've created it, you need to review it. Review and practice the material and determine if anything needs to be adjusted, both prior to delivery and based on student and personal feedback, once the material is delivered. Prior to delivery, you should personally review your materials and revise if needed, and if possible, also have a peer review it as well. It's important to always consider the efficacy of your course materials. You should gather formal and informal feedback from your students. It often takes several adjustments to course materials and content to ensure student mastery of course concepts. You may need to adjust your materials after your students have accessed it for future iterations of your course.
Now that you've organized your course material, you're ready to build your slide deck. Let's take a look at the elements to consider when creating your presentation.
The main elements you need to consider when building your presentation are the slide size, the slide composition, and accessibility of your slides.
When beginning your design, be sure you're choosing the 16:9 presentation template and not 4:3. Current electronics have wide screens which adhere to the 16:9 ratio. In order for your students to get a full screen option on their electronic devices and fill the screen with your presentation, this is the template size you must adhere to. Prior to 2009, 4:3 was the standard, but with the standardization of widescreen TVs and computer monitors, the 4:3 template was phased out. You should share your slide deck with your students. This helps your students make notes and study your material and helps them review the slide content if they're unable to see the slides clearly in your video on their device.
The next item is the slide composition itself. Writing down what you plan to say prior to building your slides can help drive how you compose them, and it serves a dual purpose as a script for when you are ready to record your presentation. It's recommended that you design your presentation in the 7:7 rule. This means no more than 7 words per line and 7 lines per slide. This rule will alleviate walls of text on your slides and help your students to actually engage in your lesson, creating bullet points with general information and then elaborating upon those points in your lecture will ensure your students are listening and taking notes rather than simply downloading your presentations. Font must be legible on the screen. And if you adhere to the 7:7 rule, generally anything smaller than size 20 or larger than size 40 will not work. It's recommended that you stay within these font size guidelines for readability on any size screen. Also, be mindful of copyright if you're using any outside material. If you are using images from a textbook, you must have exclusive rights from the publisher to showcase the visual in your presentation. Same goes for images pulled from Google or the internet. When searching for images online, you can filter the results to only show those with Creative Commons license, which are generally free to use with your presentations. However, there are different types of Creative Commons licenses, so check the images license to give credit when it's required or to verify if you can alter the image for your own use.
Accessibility should be kept in mind when creating any course content. Choosing colors for your presentation are very important when it comes to accessibility. Color contrast rules must be adhered to when creating your presentation. Contrast ratios run from 1 to 21. Most commonly written is 1:1, meaning as low contrast, or 21:1, meaning as high contrast. For fonts that are 18 points or larger, which is what is recommended within your presentation, the minimum ratio should be 3:1. For any font smaller than 18 points, you need a 4.5:1 ratio. The WebAid contrast checker, which Kristen's pulling up right now, allows you to input the foreground, which is the text, and the background colors. If your colors do not pass, you can use the little slider bar to change the color until it passes. For an accurate reading, use the hex code for colors found on the color wheel of your slideshow program. If your program only has RGB, you can select the colored rectangle within the foreground and background color boxes to enter them there and verify your contrast ratios. Other accessibility considerations include making sure you add alt text to images. This makes any non-text content readable to assistive technology like screen readers. It also provides context and explanation to those with blindness or low vision. You want to reserve all caps for acronyms only. Words and letters in all caps are harder to distinguish, especially for those with low vision or reading disorders like dyslexia. Also, when you have something in all caps, a lot of screen readers will read each individual letter versus the word itself. You don't want to underline text unless it is a link. Using underlines for anything other than hyperlinks confuses students as they perceive underlined text to lead to hyperlinked material. You want to make sure you're using descriptive text for links. URLs are read letter by letter for a screen reader, and it makes it impossible to comprehend when spoken or aloud. You want to provide the link's content or context and purpose to make it understandable. You want to avoid meaningless link like click here, this website, or link. Those don't add anything. Providing unique links makes them distinguishable and understandable. Links with identical text will confuse students. You should share your slide deck with your students. This helps students who have learning differences focus on your material versus focusing on trying to take in everything at once, your audio, your slides, and anything going on around them. This helps your students make notes and study your material, and it helps them review the slide content if they're unable to see the slides clearly in your video on their device. In the slide deck, we've got a lot of additional resources for different accessibility concepts, including links back to where we did a presentation for Hawks in December on accessibility.
Now that you've created your slide presentation, it's time to begin recording and practicing. It's important to consider many things prior to, during, and after your recording.
The first thing you need to do to prepare for your recording is draft a script. When teaching in person, it's easy to get in the rhythm and to begin feeding off the energy in your classroom. However, on a virtual level, that isn't possible. An ideal way of being sure that you're covering all the material you intend to create is to make a script or a list of ideas you wish to cover in your recording. This helps ensure that your lecture is concise and focused. While being professional is important, it's imperative that your script is still personable. Your students want to connect with you as a person. They don't want to see you as a robot reading a script like a machine. When you're working on your script, you may decide to use a teleprompter to help you track. While you're scripting, you need to think about any annotations you'll be making. It's important to remember for accessibility that you'll need to describe any annotations, as a student with a learning difference may be listening to your lecture versus being able to see it. So for example, you want to refrain from giving vague and visually based directions such as you see here, or click this button, as someone who cannot see and is listening will not be able to ascertain what you're referencing. A more effective way to describe annotations is to say, select the submit button on the lower right of your screen. Or if you're annotating a math problem, reading the numbers as you're writing them on screen.
Now it's time to begin practicing and rehearsing. We recommend that you practice your script before recording. Practice really does make perfect. Watch yourself in front of a mirror as you go through your script. Watch your mouth and how you pronounce words. This will help you deliver a clear and concise lecture with minimal stumbles. Describing your annotations will not feel natural at first. It's important to practice this during rehearsal, so when you are making your formal recording, your descriptions will feel like part of the conversation, be clear, and not feel forced. It's also important to remember your diction. Speaking to a large room and speaking into a microphone when you don't know the quality at which your student will be listening to it are two completely different experiences to prepare for. Use warm-up exercises, yes, like actors, and practice the diction of long or difficult words that may be in your lecture. The more you pronounce these words clearly and slowly, the easier it will be for your students to understand. If you find that you are habitually stumbling over a word, then you may consider revising your script to remove the problematic language.
Audio is key to recording an optimal learning experience for your students. If you have good audio, your students are more likely to stay engaged. We recommend you do a dry run. Record yourself so you can listen to how you sound. Yes, no one likes the way they sound, but you can learn a lot about the way you speak from listening to yourself. You can listen for what words you may stumble, mispronounce, or mumble through. Two of the best options for quality audio are to use a headset microphone duo or a lavalier microphone. The benefits of these two options are they get close enough to your mouth to pick up sound without a lot of echo. It is not recommended that you use your computer's built-in microphone since these are generally not good quality and they pick up a lot of ambient noise in room echo, which is incredibly distracting. If you'll be producing a large number of videos and planning to teach online more regularly, it may be a good idea to invest in high quality audio products. Echoes can be difficult to alleviate, but here's some helpful tips. Surround your work area with stacks of blankets or towels out of the view of camera. You can even hang a blanket from the wall in front of you to help absorb sound. Audio bounces off hard objects such as walls, but absorbs into softer objects such as blankets, towels, or even hanging clothes. Try to record in the smallest room possible so there's less chance for echo, but make sure there's enough room behind you for space between you and the wall. If you're only recording audio, consider setting up in a closet. You'll have plenty of clothing to absorb the echo around you. And if you're not on camera, it doesn't matter where you are in your home, as long as it's quiet and distraction free. When working on audio levels, strive for quality sound at the mid level, which is 50% of maximum volume. This is where most students listen on their devices. Record yourself and play with the levels. If you record too loud, the audio will distort and pop when certain letters or words are pronounced. If your audio is too soft, your message will get lost.
Now it's time, after you've rehearsed and reviewed your practice recording, to identify any adjustments needed for your formal recording. As a reminder, if you are annotating within your recording, you must describe what you are doing for accessibility purposes. For easier editing, it's best practice to pause in between your slides rather than speak through the transitions, as well as either pause or make a loud noise such as a clap to help you identify where you may have made a mistake or an error occurred. When editing your recording, remember it's okay to be human. In other words, don't feel like you have to try exactly what I'm doing right now, that you need to try to cut every utter, or stutter out of your recordings. Also think about whether interactivity can be added within or at the end of the presentation to increase your student engagement. In the notes, again, there are some links to some video software. There are subscriptions needed, but there are also some free video editors listed in the resources in this area.
It's important to make sure your recording meets accessibility standards. All videos require closed captioning. If your presentation is audio only, you must provide a transcript. Either way, machine-generated captions do not meet 508 accessibility requirements. It's fine to start with machine-generated captions. You just need to make sure you go back and manually edit them. Students of all learning abilities rely on closed captions or transcripts. Berg et al. In 2014 found that all students who were studied leveraged closed captions, even though none of the students had an auditory learning difference. It's also important to make sure you provide your slide deck to your students, as this will help all of your students gain a stronger mastery of the lecture material, and it will help students with learning differences. And we've provided, again, several sets of resources, the Berg study, some general accessibility guidelines, how to do captions, and how to make transcripts successful.
Once you have it all put together, there are several options for presenting the lecture material. You can play the pre-recorded lecture during a synchronous meeting. This allows you to actually interact with your students during the lecture. So an example of that might be when you're having a meeting via a platform such as Zoom, you can actually play the video and then use that time to interact with any questions that may come through in chat. You can also use the recordings to have the students watch prior to your meeting with them. So you'll have the students do it for homework prior to your class meeting. During class, then you and your students will be able to work with the lecture material. And another option might be, if your LMS allows, you may embed interactive elements into the videos, such as multiple choice quizzes, And if you don't have that option, another option for an LMS may also be to have the students hold a discussion board conversation about the material you have talked about. Again, as a reminder, it's important that you do provide your students with the slide deck, as this will set them all up for success. They're able to take notes on the slide deck, ask questions, and pay attention to the lecture versus trying to write everything down that's on your slides. Converting your slides to PDF is strongly discouraged, as it does make your slide deck more inaccessible. And at this point, we will actually open it up to questions. I know one came through. I don't know if somebody had already gotten it. Yes, about the recording.
And I did just put in the chat the link to the slide deck also.
And I'll mention real quick that if anyone does have questions, if you are looking at the Zoom window at the bottom, there's a little Q&A button. You'll be able to click there and then submit any questions, and we can all see them then. Here, all presenters.
So a question that just came through, thanks Kelly. Do you have a list of other examples that would make a PowerPoint more accessible? So let me actually pull out of here, and I will go back to our accessibility slide. Bear with me for 1 second. I went too far. I apologize. So within the actual list of our notes, we have provided, these are what we're talking about, the resources. We have links to 2 different Hawks Learning regarding some of those items. We also have a digital checklist that can help with that. And if you're unsure or not familiar with the different levels of web accessibility, there is a link to kind of describe the difference between them. And then on this one, we talked about color contrast and alternative text. But on the last one, when we were referring to the audio and video accessibility, that's where you're going to find this stuff about captions and transcripts, as that's after the fact, not for the actual slide deck itself. Crystal, I'm not sure, were there any other areas that we had something about PowerPoint specifically?
No, I don't think, other than that, and you talked about it, the link to where we did PowerPoint specifically for Hawks in December. And I actually we linked to that slide to Hawks page, which has a link to the slide deck from that presentation, and pretty much all of our handouts, the slide deck, the videos, it's all in there. So
yes,
if
there
you have
are 5 different ones, yes.
Yeah. So probably just about any PowerPoint question that would be pretty general is definitely answered there. The big ones when it comes to PowerPoint is definitely color contrast on the slides, and just not overwhelming your students with information on the slide deck. When you pop up a slide and it's full of text, all your students are going to do while you're talking is be reading the slide. They're not listening to you. They're tuning you out. And so it really is, kind of as we did in the slide deck, our slides don't have a lot of language on it because that forces everybody who's attending the lecture to listen versus sitting there and just reading the slide deck.
The one thing I was going to point out that we just became aware of when we talked in December about PowerPoint, we talked about the fact that the reading order is actually read from bottom to top. If you get the newest version of Microsoft PowerPoint, they are fixing that. So it's going to be top to bottom. So it's going to depend on which version you have, but in the content that we provided previously, just so you're aware, the arrange order, which is like the list of what's on your slide read from top to bottom, and the reading order, which is really important for your slide deck. That's the order in which a screen reader identifies and reads it out loud. So if you want an image read after text or the opposite way, you have to make sure they're in the correct order, and that has some information. But if you get the most recent version of PowerPoint, make note that it's going to be read from top to bottom. We have a question about microphones. Are there any specific that you recommend? I will tell you, I have a headset that I don't use. Part of the reason is what we were talking about, those audio levels. I have a louder voice, and it tends to make my words pop because the microphone is not flexible. It's a hard plastic and it's too close to my mouth. So it depends on the person, honestly. Those are a little bit cheaper. We've said gaming headsets.
I use a gaming headset. I use an Xbox headset, so it just depends. And there's lots of different price points too. You know, the sky is the limit on what audio recording stuff costs. Like, you can get some incredibly expensive stuff that will make a beautiful audio recording. But you can also get a gaming headset for about $50, which is probably more in line with somebody who's habitually teaching online price point would probably feel comfortable with.
And one of the other things I was going to mention, Crystal, the one that she has, you can't see it right now with her hair, but the game, which is the piece that's coming towards her mouth, is substantially shorter than the one I have. So the one I have comes almost all the way directly in front of my mouth. And even when I move it up, the whole point of having either a lavalier like on your lapel or having it so that it's closer to your mouth is so that you have directionality for your voice or your audio. So for instance, if I have a microphone in front of me, and when I turn, my audio changes, versus if it's on my actual body or if it's right on my head, it's not going to have that same difference when you turn or if you do something while you're speaking. So that's part of the reason why those are usually better. If you're looking for a higher price point, honestly, the Blue Yeti is awesome, but it's substantially more expensive. It's usually over $100. If you're trying to prevent pop, a screen, which you've probably seen, if you've seen, you know, people on the radio and things like that, there's like a little screen that goes in front of that helps to, the filter helps to reduce the pop if you have any of that for your audio as well. Any other questions?
And since we had a question about PowerPoint accessibility earlier, I just want to stress this because this is a common misconception that accessibility means boring. It does not. Our whole slide deck that we just showed you all is 100% accessible. Accessible does not have to mean you have a white slide with black text. You can do color. You can do interesting.
Definitely. You just have to make sure that you're adding things such as alt text for your images. Now, one thing to note, difference between PowerPoint and Google, if you are using, for instance, on our slides, we do have some fun little images, right? So we have where we have actually put our Bitmojis in. Those are technically decorative. Everything on the screen is decorative. All of these within a Google slide have to be marked as decorative by actually typing the word decorative so that it is, because the screen reader identifies that there's an image. And if it doesn't say anything, somebody that's listening for what's on the screen wouldn't be able to identify that they're not missing content. So you want to identify that it is something that they shouldn't be missing. But in PowerPoint or Microsoft, there is now the option to actually check mark a box that marks it decorative, and the screen reader will then just skip over it and not even let them know something's there because they don't need to know it's there. Anything else that you can think of that's specific to those? What recommendations do you have for engaging all students to interact in a synchronous class? Crystal, do you want to talk on that? I know you're currently teaching asynchronous, but.
Especially if you want to pre-record, I know we're in a situation where a lot of people are hybrid, or, you know, they have students who are missing class right now because of COVID and they're trying to pick up stuff afterwards. And something that a lot of our colleagues has expressed has been helpful to them is doing what we said about pre-recording the lectures, and they'll either assign it as homework, and then the students are expected to come in having watched it, and then they'll, you know, do kind of a hands-on activity about that lecture, or they'll play the lecture in class. Because again, if you've chunked it, you're only talking 5 to 7 minutes, you know, ideally around that 6-minute mark. And then you're able to actually interact with the students while you're actually playing back through that lecture. And you could technically like pause it and stuff, but that way you're more focused on, you know, being present with your students than going, oh my gosh, I got to get all this stuff from my lecture out. I got to make sure I cover this, this, and this. And then you've got the drama that happened in your office earlier, and you're trying to remember that meeting you've got later. This helps you be more focused.
And I was also going to mention, I don't know what platform you're using, but for instance, if you do want to promote interaction, I know a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to use breakout rooms, but something that not everyone's thinking about is, well, what, you can't be in every breakout room if you're using Zoom, for instance. You can't see into every room at the same time. So making sure that you're pre-planning and having what we call a living document, whether that's through Office 365, if that's through Google Drive, but you have something where you can see without physically seeing them, you know, their image, because if they're on video or not, or their names, you know, that you can see kind of what each group is working on. There are some different suggestions, and I believe in, and I'm trying to remember which one, Crystal, that we talked about that. I think it was, we have another one, I don't think we linked to it. There is a Zoom Engage one that we had previously done with Hawks as well. We can find
I'll
that.
grab it. I'll grab it when you're talking.
And some of the ideas for that is you could do something dependent upon, you know, I don't know what topic you're teaching, Mary, but if you have anything that they can make a decision or debate about, like how they would, you know, react to a certain situation, and then you make each breakout room kind of a response, and then you can have, you know, each group has English. Okay, so definitely the working or living documents is helpful, but like if you can do it as they have to go into the rooms, and then, you know, you provide them different information, and now there's where they can choose to move to a different room if their choice changes, or maybe they are picking a specific topic or subtopic that they need to learn about, and then work as a group and come back to the main room after to present upon a specific subtopic. I'm trying to think there, you could also do poster presentation kind of thing. One thing to note, if you are using Zoom that not everyone is aware of, you do need to enable the students to be able to share their screens in the breakout rooms. Like, just because you push them into the breakout rooms, if you want them to work on a document, you probably want at least one of them to have the ability to share the document so they can all be looking at it at once, even though only one person is screen sharing. That will give them the ability to not, you know, have Zoom in the background and then have the document on top if they're all, you know, one person's recording kind of thing. And I was also going to mention, if you are looking for recordings to see what your students are doing in breakout rooms, that you also have to allow recording if you are doing something within the breakout rooms themselves. Anything else regarding, polling? I will tell you, you're kind of limited on polls in Zoom, but there are a lot. I mean, poll everywhere. You could just share your screen with, like, you could create them in advance. There are different tools. You don't have to use only what the one platform that you're using, but, you know, having the ability to not just talk the entire time or lecture the entire time. So the pre-recording chunks are great, but let's say you are going to live lecture, you want to break it up with something, because if they're just there, and obviously most places are not requiring or allowing you to require video due to different circumstances with FERPA. So you might not know if they're really there. They could technically be in the meetings and then walk away. So one way to promote that interactivity and making sure that they're still there and with you is to put those little interactive pieces in between. So, you know, quick knowledge check, or, you know, giving an opinion about something. Now, with polling in Zoom, you are limited to either multiple select, meaning they can checkbox multiple, or you can do multiple choice, which are radio buttons, which is only a single choice. However, if you're using poll everywhere, I believe there are some other options for you, and there are other types of software that you can also use so that you have some other options.
You could make a Google form even.
Yeah,
if your
exactly.
university or if your institution has, you know, access to the Google suite, you could easily make a Google form.
Any other questions? These are good questions.
And I did put in the chat for anybody who's doesn't have the chat open, the slide deck for the using Zoom to engage your students and the recording of that presentation. So if that's something you're interested in some more information on. Saying at one regarding teaching for classroom format. I'm reading the question. Oh, okay. I'm gonna assume your email is your name. So Kim says she's not regarding a question, but additional information. If you're interested, the question posed by Mary as she's presenting this, Kim is presenting at 1 regarding teaching in a flipped classroom format.
Just want to hop in real quick. Crystal, you said you posted those links in the chat. Looks like one person mentioned that they weren't seeing it in there.
It's in the Q&A chat, so you might need to, the person said they don't see it. You might have to press the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then that's going to pop up the little question answer video, and you'll hit answered, and you should be able to get the links there.
And you should, if you wanted to, you can also, the actual chat in here, it's disabled for people to be able to chat in, but you can push that out to everyone if you would like to, if you have those links, you can do it that way as well.
I can do that.
Never mind. Perfect.
So that's that. And just in case nobody's got it, I'll get this link for the set from today.
And did you want me to throw the accessibility ones in there too?
Yeah, probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
Thank you for that.
Let me.
Oh, Crystal, I think that went only to panelists. I'll copy it and put it in.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
There's some open questions. Let's see. I think we got them all. Other questions, other comments, concerns, things you want to ask?
And if you have the opportunity, I mean, I don't know, it depends on your school as well, but Camtasia is one of the ones that requires a subscription, but it is, if you are doing your own video editing, it's probably one of the, I think, most intuitive of the paid subscription and gives you a little bit more option. We've also have the link in there for like Screencast-O-Matic. Screencast-O-Matic is great, but the free version, just so you know, does have a little
Got their little logo
at the bottom if you have the free version as well. Carlo, were you able to get them? If you select chat at the bottom center of your Zoom window, we put them into the Zoom chat. Were you able to get those?
All right. Could you try reposting them in there real quick to see? It might have not popped up for them immediately. So that should, even though it is disabled, it should be available for them.
I just put all three of them in the one.
Okay.
Okay, I just saw that.
Sorry, I was trying to, that was what I was taking a second to do, try to delete out the timestamps from those.
All right. Carlos said thank you. So it looks like they should have been able to get that. Perfect. Yep. Looks like people definitely seeing them in there.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Well, on that note, then I'll say a quick thank you to you both. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Crystal. That was great information that you shared.